Now remember, everybody in the audience is getting one of these flu shots, so we all get it. I'm just going first. We all get it.
What do you think about that?
Well, what I think about that, when Dr. Oz told the audience that they were all going to get it, if you really notice, they actually had to cut in a whole other segment of everybody smiling, which is a complete fraud, because when you realize that the polls have been done, more than 50% of the physicians in practice will not prescribe, will not recommend anybody getting flu vaccines, particularly H1N1. More than 60% of the nurses in New York State, just like the UK, will not get it. And Consumer Reports recently did an investigation, a poll of regular, average Joe Americans, and they found that more than 50% of the people would not take H1N1 flu vaccines this fall. So if you really look at that segment that ABC News has up right now on Dr. Oz, it's a complete fraud. And it's a propaganda piece that's intended to literally serve the great media moguls that Dr. Oz is actually serving.
So when you mention these media moguls, you're talking, and I read some of your stuff, you're talking about Rupert Murdoch.
Right.
And Rupert Murdoch, he's probably the biggest media mogul. He owns most of the media.
Most of the media. Time Warner Cable, he owns Fox, and most of the newspapers generally are owned by Rupert Murdoch and the colleagues in this partnership for New York City, which was founded by David Rockefeller, as well as, interestingly enough, Goldman Sachs' CEO is a co-chairman. His name is Lloyd Blankfein, and in fact he's the funding organization for the Weinstein brothers, Weinstein Corporation, that used to be called Miramax and is currently called Disney, and basically ABC is one of their subsidiaries. So here's what we have. We have the Partnership for New York City, which actually is a drug ring. It is the world's most advanced biotechnology organization, advancing through propaganda the need for vaccinations and genetic engineering, and that these media moguls are actually pulling the strings on people like Dr. Oz, who is really serving as a propaganda pimp, if you will.
So not only is it Rupert Murdoch, but we also have other people involved in the media, and these media people also have pharmaceutical companies as well, like
Yes.
Rupert Murdoch is involved with CSL, CSL Pharmaceuticals.
Yes, exactly.
And is he also conducting swine flu testing at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute in
Yes,
Australia?
exactly right.
Okay, I did read that, Dr. Horowitz. Now, what do you think people will think if you tell them that the people that own the media are also the same people that are in control and own these pharmaceuticals that are producing these swine flu vaccinations?
Well, that's a good question, Sherry. You know, what most people do when they hear this information is, most people actually have a difficult time in believing it. In fact, you literally see the window shade of disbelief come in front of their eyes, where they are no longer really listening to you. What's going on as a behavioral scientist, I can tell you, they're actually accessing their own belief. There's an internal dialogue going on. They're checking their own beliefs against what you're telling them. So they're not really paying attention, they're not really listening. And those who are wise, those who understand that you can't trust everything that you read in a newspaper and you can't trust everything you see on primetime television, those people typically will say, you know, that's interesting. But the fact of the matter is that even those people have no clue about the depth of this hideous conspiracy that literally links the world's most powerful media moguls with the world's most powerful drug industrialists and vaccine developers, and what their true agendas are.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the connection, and I looked at that, and that's why I had you on this program, is so you can tell people exactly what it is that we're looking at. I mean, it seems like if you connect the dots, the Partnership for New York City is a who's who of the most powerful people pretty much on the planet. You have Thomas Glosser, who is the CEO of Reuters.
Reuters News Service. Yeah, and it's funny, the story for H1N1 was broken by Reuters News Service, which, as Sherry just said, is a Thomas H. Glossier organization. And he is also one of the major partners, movers, and shakers in Partnership for New York City. Again, this is the major biotechnology and vaccine industry trust. The drug cartel, the global big pharma drug cartel, this is the heart of it in New York City, and this is where we heard first about H1N1.
Interesting. And there's more. There's William Zuckerman, right? And William Zuckerman, he was also involved in something prior. He was involved with the Lyme disease vaccinations. Is that correct? And he's the guy who is running the...
Yes, exactly. The U.S. News and World Report. The editor-in-chief is Zuckerman. And Zuckerman is actually also the financier behind the Lyme disease organization that was spreading the propaganda that the Lyme was such a wonderful vaccine to take, when in fact it was hideously toxic. Anybody that reviewed or cared to review the science from the very beginning saw that about 25% to 26% of the people that took that vaccine were expected to develop all the symptoms of Lyme. And so if you knew that in advance, why did it take the FDA about 9 months before they finally pulled that vaccine off of the market, when about 700,000 Americans were intoxicated and seriously chronically made ill from Lyme?
Interesting. Well, let's go back to this Dr. Oz's segment on ABC, because there was a man that Dr. Oz was speaking with, that was Dr.
Right.
Anthony Fauci.
These are the people who are on the front lines. Dr. Anthony Fauci is the top infectious disease specialist at the National Institutes of Health.
Now, Dr. Anthony Fauci has some personal interests involved with the vaccinations.
Yes, he does.
And he's also the person that was involved with Zuckerman. Is that correct? He was the
Zuckerman actually gave Dr. Anthony Fauci an award for America's leading hero. You know, there was a number of awards that were given, and Zuckerman actually of U.S. News and World Report gave one of those awards to Dr. Fauci. Come to find out, we didn't realize until much later that there was this gross conflict of interest between both of them. Zuckerman, media mogul, basically what he was doing is promoting vaccinations through Dr. Fauci's award ceremony, and basically Dr. Fauci, people should realize, is the AIDS czar for America. He's the director for National Institute for Allergies and Infectious Diseases. That is literally, according to the Central Intelligence Agency, documentation as well as the Washington Post, it is the CIA that governs and controls and dictates what Dr. Fauci and his organization does, including what they say in the media. So basically the propaganda line is directed by the mouthpieces for the CIA, which is Washington Post, it's LA Times, sometimes it's New York Times, and mainstream media in general. And it's all done, they say, for, quote, national security, because these infectious diseases, they say, represent a gross threat to the economy, to the population, military service personnel, and this is considered a high-risk military and national security threat. So it's Dr. Fauci who is a totally amazing conflict of interest and fraud, because number one, Dr. Fauci's organization, if you really study the science of HIV/AIDS, the AIDS czar has been covering up the origin of AIDS from a hepatitis B vaccine prepared in chimpanzees. Contaminated chimpanzees were used to prepare the 1972 through 4 hepatitis B vaccines given to gay men in New York City, blacks in Central Africa, and Willowbrook State School mentally retarded children on Staten Island in New York. And the National Institute for Allergies and Infectious Diseases, that is overseen by the CIA, as one of those strains of the vaccines, was totally their responsibility. And the other 3 vaccines that were given during that period was taken responsibility for by the CDC, the FDA, as well as the Merck Pharmaceutical Company.